We are working on the buttercream again, and I have some extrapolations of ideas and thoughts and an experiment that I did. Such a good song. Love it. All right, I'm gonna leave my time on my clock so that I can keep track. World clock, New York, 11:57. It's Sunday, all around the world. We're here to talk about everything pastry and baking, and this week was buttercream week. We have people from all over the world on this live right now, which is incredibly exciting, and the great thing about food is we all speak the same language. I just want to ask, when I make a cake, it always collapses. Oh, there could be so many reasons. It could be the mix, it could be temperatures, it could be your oven. And I guess I would just encourage you to watch some of my videos that I've already made, because a lot of the information does not change. It's universal and it stays the same. I think I'm getting better at keeping the tempo and the pace moving. So we're gonna get started right away on an experiment, but then I'm gonna go all to the questions and be able to chat a little bit more. The best substitute for buttermilk. You have to look at the composition of what you're replacing it with. I like kefir or kefir, or however you pronounce it. And buttermilk is usually fat-free, so if you're going to replace one for one, you want to make sure you get the same fat version. Some people make soured milk. They'll add lemon to milk. That gives you the acidity, but it does not give you the body and the other things that buttermilk gives you. So I would try a liquid, fermented, or cultured product, like liquid yogurt or a liquid kefir. Yes. Great. I love kefir. I drink it every day. I drink buttermilk a lot every day. I love it. So you just kind of have to look at how things are made, and, you know, 1-to-1 from fat to fat, no fat to no fat, and kind of keep track of that stuff. Oh, here we are. It's noon. I get a little announcement. Hello, everybody. It is noon on the East Coast in the United States. I'm glad that a lot of people all over the world can make this time. It's so hard. Hi, Eli. I know it's a lot earlier on the West Coast. So I'm so glad to have everybody here. I have been completely immersed in buttercream. It's still buttercream week. This is the Practice of Pastries Baking Club. And every week we pick a new subject, and then on Wednesdays, I lecture and demo the subject, and then on Sundays we come back and we kind of tie up all our loose ends. You love buttercream week? Thank you. You're having breakfast? Nice. Go ahead, eat while you watch. I think you can type while you eat. I did do the Russian buttercream. Did you recommend it, Chef Barry? Because, you know, I'd never heard of it. And I will tell everybody I am a traditionalist. Once I find a recipe that works, I stick with it. And one of the reasons I love teaching, okay, thank you. Thanks, Chef. One of the reasons I like teaching is because you literally keep learning. That is why I say sometimes it's not really a great learning process to read other people's work. I have learned more from doing this experiment I did this week than, not more than I have in my entire career, but I've tied together some of the loose ends and discovered a lot. And then when you recommend I try something and I go try it, it just opens up my mind to all the possibilities. And the Russian buttercream is one of my new favorites. I was saying I think it'd make a great macaron filling. It's excellent. I love that it has a bit of saltiness and sugarology 101. Her recommendation to add 10x to the butter to give it a little bit of catch and stabilize it is the way to go. If you're doing it another way and it worked out, that's great. But if it fails next time, which is what I hear from a lot of people, like things work out once and then they don't work out again, sometimes you have to go back to the basics. So the PoP is the Practice of Pastry. I am Kathleen, Chef Kathleen. I have been on TikTok now for about 2.5 years teaching, and I just started doing lives about a month ago, and all of my wonderful viewers suggested we do a baking club. So you choose a subject and a recipe every single Sunday, and then we do it the next week. Now, I have been in the industry in one way or another. I've been everything from, you know, a waitress to working at delis, country clubs. I've been in the industry since I was 15. And then in my 40s, I went back to school and got a baking certificate and then went to the French pastry school. I went back to school, got an associate's degree in baking and pastry arts, and then I went to the French pastry and earned a certificate. So I became a teacher. I taught at the college level for over 12 years, but it's just been my thing. It's been my industry and my love and my focus for pretty much my entire life. I consider it a gift. I don't know why it is that I'm this way, but I am. And I also am a teacher and proctor of ServSafe, so I try to stick to all of the sanitation practices that I believe in, and I hope that you support and follow people who think that that's important, because I absolutely do. On last Wednesday, I made 3 buttercreams. On Wednesday, I lectured the general idea of what a buttercream is, and then I demonstrated an American buttercream, a Swiss buttercream, and an Italian buttercream. So I have done a little bit of work in terms of storage and testing and some other things that I want to tie up, including how to flavor the buttercreams. So that's what we're gonna do. And I'm going to actually start right away, because while things are mixing, because I'm going to show you the test that I did, we can talk and I can answer some questions from last week. If I do not get to your question today, even the entire time, I go through all the comments and I write them down, and then the following meeting we have, I answer all of them. And sometimes I put your name next to it so I can remember. We are going to use a freeze-dried fruit that I pulverize, a fruit puree that I made a video about, melted chocolate, and some simple syrup. I thought, why not use some of our lemon simple syrup? So I talk about how cold it's been here, but now it's getting warm, which I actually like, because when it starts to get more humid, it's a little bit easier to work. And then once it passes into too humid, then it becomes hard again. Oh, you'd love to go to pastry school, but you can't stand for long. You know what? Schools have to make accommodations for you, and there are ways for you to go to school. You can be provided a stool for working and for demos, which often really bother people's backs. It's harder to stand during a 3-hour-long demo than it is to work. So I would recommend that you look into the purple slip. I always had students who had accommodations, and it is the school's job to make things easier for you, whatever they are. And so don't let that hold you back. There is no reason you can't sit while you work. I'm going to clean the countertop, and we're going to start on the buttercream test that I did. And it's really a test about fats. So you're going to get to know fats better. And I actually recommend that you do this experiment. And I got it, I think, from How Baking Works. I have a lot of things that I've collected, and sometimes I forget where I got them. Yes, accommodations are very important when you're talking about a physical and an educational space, because there are people who need more time taking written exams or with the homework. And then there are people who have physical issues that make it hard for them to do what maybe the speed or mostly the speed. And so whatever it is that you need, the schools are there to accommodate you, and teachers should be wonderful about it. And if they're not, just go to the administration and talk to them about it, because that, especially at a community college like I've taught at, it's our job to make things work for you. It's not about making it easier, it's about making it so that you can be successful. And there's a huge difference, and people should look at it that way. So I'm glad to talk about it. All right, I'm gonna go pull my hair up. I'm gonna be back in 2 seconds, and then we're gonna get started. Enjoy looking at my ingredients for now. Okay. I'm gonna wash my hands and get my apron on. I see a lot of videos with people putting their hair up in the kitchen or right in front of where they're working. I think it's horrible. So I definitely want to do my very best to demonstrate best practices, but sometimes that can be hard. For those of you who don't know, I work out of a kitchen in a rented space. It's just a residential kitchen, and It isn't perfect, but I absolutely love it. So I work with an oven and a sink. I have, you know, one basin sink, and I have an oven I rent, so I don't get to pick out my oven. And so that gives me some limitations that I think make me understand what you guys need and what you're working with. Because I'll tell you, when you work in a professional kitchen for a long time, you get really spoiled. Happy Sunday. Some of you have asked what I use to sanitize my countertop. I just use a disinfecting spray, and I do not spray when there's food, open food around. When I am working in a sustained way, I tend to get my sanitation bucket, and I use bleach at the right concentration, and I use testers that I buy on Amazon. So it's not fancy, but that is what works. And I just let this dry. So I am going to pull up some of the questions so that I can answer those while this stuff mixes. Okay, so you know what we're doing. We're working on buttercreams this week. I demoed and lectured on Wednesday, and we made 3 kinds. Today we are going to talk in general about buttercreams, because my goal is not for you to cling to a recipe. It's so that you can begin to bridge the gap between what professionals know and what the home baker could know. Because I don't see any difference between a professional and a home baker. You have access to exactly the same information. You just need to look at it differently. So when you look at buttercreams, you are looking at a few different ingredients. The American buttercream is fat and powdered sugar, or 10x, and that gets mixed together, and you can add different things to it to alter it, depending on always temperature, humidity, the desired need you have, if you want to pipe it or hold a cake up, or if you want it to be loose, and or you know, whatever your end goal is. And then you have European buttercreams, which are based on either an egg white meringue or an egg yolk foam that you either cook at a lower temperature or at a higher temperature. But they are foundationally based in some sort of egg foam and fat. So fat is something you need to think about, because sometimes you want to use butter, sometimes shortening, sometimes cream cheese. There are all these different things. So in How Baking Works, they have this fat test for a simple icing. Oops, where did I put my notes? Oh boy, I do this every time I get organized. I organize myself right out of it. Oh, here they are. I'll tell you, this is hilarious. And if you want to get to know me better, this is why I couldn't find them, because here are my test subjects, and here are the notes right on there. Okay, so I organize myself right into oblivion all the time. I have to think, what was I thinking when I organized? Okay, so these are my notes. I'm gonna move the mixer. And I did 7 tests, and I did 6 before I got on the live. And don't worry if I don't answer your question. I basically will come back around to it. It's just really hard to demo, talk, and answer the questions, but I am getting better at it. Okay, so I did 7 different fats. And what you do is you take 180 grams of fat, 300 grams of 10x, and 60 grams of egg white. And because this is an inedible test, I just bought egg whites that have no stabilizer. And I'm gonna get it started and tell you what it's about. The tools you need for this experiment are your bowl, a whip attachment, a paddle attachment, and a timer. And this is a thermometer and timer called the Chef Alarm, which I highly recommend. I do not have the probe, is in the drawer, but I use this as a timer. It's so easy to use. So here's what I'm gonna do. This is the fat is cream cheese. And the cream cheese is going to go in the mixer on the paddle for 3 minutes on low. By doing this, I get to see how the cream cheese looks and how it performs. And it needs to be on low for 3 minutes. So I'm gonna start that, and then I'm gonna explain to you all the other fats that I'm using. And that's just low, right there. once I get this done and I put them all together, you are literally going to see the difference between, you're going to see the difference between European butter, American butter, margarine, table margarine, half fat, half Sweetex, and Crisco, which is all-purpose shortening. And you are literally going to get to see how they are different in terms of how much air you can incorporate into them and what color they are. And when you see the final results, you're just going to be shocked. It's so amazing. And I took notes as I went along, because once I get this going, I'm going to notice a couple of things. How much did this loosen up on the paddle, the fat, without being warmed up? If it's cold, how did it take the 10X? Did it absorb it right away? And then what happened and changed about adding egg whites to it? Sweetex, okay, great question. Sweetex is, let me get this, and I have a timer on just so you know. Sweetex is it's called an icing or high ratio cake shortening. And it comes in 2 brands in the United States, Sweetex and Alpine. And I found it online in smaller quantities, but it's really expensive. So I buy a 50-pound box. It's about $100. When it gets old, I just get rid of it because I don't use a ton, but you definitely need it for American buttercream and if you're going to be doing cake work. Oftentimes I use it for recipes I got from bakeries. So this is what it looks like when it's in the box. It comes out like this. And fat, and I'm not a scientist and I don't pretend to be, but it's made from a lot of different kinds of fats, are like crystals. And the crystals, I think, are formed from triglycerides. But the point is, last Wednesday when I did this, I had lumps in it. And it's because mine has gotten old, so I ordered a new one. And I had noticed it in my gum paste work. I am making a test of a fat with egg white and 10X to see how it acts, and I'm going to explain to you my test when it comes together. Because we're on buttercream week. So this is a test of different kinds of fats and how they aerate and look. That way, and especially if you do this test, because that's what I encourage you to do, if you do this test at home, you will learn more about fats and buttercream than 10 years of making buttercream once a year. So I used this for the American buttercream and I had lumps in it. And what I did is I took that shortening. This is the same thing. This, I paddled on the paddle. Look how light it is. This is Sweetex that has been paddled until it's aerated. So soft. The thing about a high ratio shortening is it's designed. It has emulsifiers, and emulsifiers make water and oil come together. Emulsifiers make it so that this holds an enormous amount of moisture and sugar. That is what high ratio icing is. And look how light and fluffy that is compared to this, which is how it comes out of the box. Hard, firm, it's got fat crystals in it, and those don't disappear unless you whip it. So that is Sweetex, okay? That's what we're working with. We're doing an experiment, and it's gonna help us understand more about the fats that we use in buttercreams. Everything from cream cheese icing to the high ratio American butter cream to a European butter. So there is a paddle on here, and I did that for 3 minutes on low. And I just did it so that this would get, smooth and kind of get it started. So no air. There's no air in here, but it's just been softened. And I did that with every fat, every single fat. And every single one was so significantly different. It was amazing. So then I'm going to put the powdered sugar, which is 10X. It's been sugar that's been milled 10 times, so it's very fine particles with 3 to 5% cornstarch added. Cornstarch absorbs moisture and it stabilizes a buttercream. All right, so I'm going to start it on low for 1 minute. And the interesting thing is some of these fats absorb the 10X just like that, and others rejected it. How do you choose between a paddle and a whisk, making the meringue? So in this test, I'm doing what the instructions say, but if you are choosing with, let's say, you can switch. If you start with a whip, the whip attachment, if you are doing an egg foam with yolk or white, you're going to start with this, because this helps actually create air for those kinds of ingredients. When you go to add the butter, you can leave this if you want, or you can switch to the paddle. This obviously does not have the surface area of a paddle. So sometimes that's good and sometimes it's not. And some people like to finish things on the paddle. And just so you know, I'm going to be using this to reconstitute all my buttercreams, if that helps explain that. Okay. So this was just mixed up. It's obviously got powdered sugar on the edges, so I'm just going to take the paddle. And I could use my spatula, but it's really convenient to just use the paddle this way. And scrape the edges, and then on the bottom I just want to make sure the powdered sugar is not stuck, and it kind of is, so I'm just using this to scrape it up. And if you were to look at this up close, I don't know if you can see some of the lumps. It's a little bit lumpy. Yeah, I'm going to switch to the whip because that's what the directions say. If your recipes say to do the whip, even if it's with the butter, do that, do what it says. If something goes wrong, some kind of end thing, air bubbles, or you don't like it, then switch. So start with what they tell you to and then think how you want to change it. So I am going to just scrape this a little bit with my spatula. So I am going to get all of this off of here. And again, this is the cream cheese, because cream cheese is something that people really like to make buttercreams out of. A cream cheese buttercream obviously is really nice on a lot of quick bread type things like zucchini and carrot. So then once this goes in here, whip on high for 6 minutes, and every 2 minutes I'm going to scrape it. All right, so I'm going to turn that up to high. So when you're working with buttercreams, you're looking at how much air is it holding, how much sugar can it hold, is it lumpy, how much moisture does it hold, and then when it's done, what's the consistency? Because cream cheese icing oftentimes is really soft. A European really gives you a nice structure on your cake. So these are considerations when you're choosing a fat. 10x is the same thing you find in the grocery store. Sometimes you will see powdered sugar that says 6x. 6x means that it has been milled 6 times. That actually has a little less cornstarch in it, so some people call it icing sugar. And some people don't like the cornstarch flavor. So a lot of professional cake decorators will use 6x, but know that that sugar crystal has not been milled quite as fine. You can refrigerate your buttercream depending on when you're going to use it, how long it's going to stay in the cooler, and you need to have it room temperature when you use it. But if you're going to use cream cheese, and any fat, you do the firmer fat first and then you add the softer fat. A lot of people don't like the taste of cornstarch and powdered sugar, so you can look for 6x. It's going to have a little less cornstarch in it. So it's been about 2 minutes, and I'm just going to scrape this really fast and show it to you. So this is what it looks like, and you know, it's relatively stiff, and unfortunately, there was no way I could do this little test with all of these. It took me over an hour to do the whole thing. Start. So I'm going to give it 2 more minutes, and then I'm going to scrape it again. Someone sent me the idea for a Swiss meringue buttercream with cream cheese. And the person who wrote it still ended up with a lumpy product. And what they did is they made the entire Swiss buttercream, and then they added the cream cheese at the end. So what you want to do is, if you make a Swiss or an Italian buttercream and you want to add cream cheese or anything really firm, you want to make your meringue and then take the cream cheese in a clean bowl on a paddle, get that soft, and then add the butter to that, and then that mixture will go in your meringue, if that makes any sense. The consistency for a 10x and a 6x is definitely going to be grittiness, but it's it's going to perform the same way, but even with an American buttercream that's made with 10X, you're still going to have a gritty texture compared to like a European buttercream. The type of buttercream that your Publix makes is most likely 100% shortening. If they tell you it has butter in it, it has a minimum amount, and they only do that so they can say it has butter, but it's most likely Sweetex or Alpine, and you can ask to see the bucket they use because they get everything in buckets and frozen. So they pull the cakes frozen, they pull the icing out of a bucket, and they finish the cake. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I believe in knowing what you're eating, and so now you know. If you're gonna make cream cheese icing, you want to paddle the cream cheese first, then add the butter and get that to the consistency you want, and then add the sugar. Because you're adding the firmest thing you need to smooth out, and then you add the next thing, and then you add the sugar a little bit at a time. And this is how everything that I talk about, when I add things in thirds, when I'm making anything that I make and I add it in thirds, that's because you have to pay attention to the order and texture and temperature and how fluid or firm things are. So you want cream cheese first, then the soft butter, get that cohesive, and then you want to add the sugar. All right, so I have about a minute and a half left. I'm just going to scrape this. And again, this isn't going to make sense to you maybe until you see the whole thing together, and then it will. One of the things we add to a lot of these buttercreams are egg whites, and that's why this test has us adding egg whites, because you can add air to fat. That's what you do in the creaming method. The sugar cuts through the fat and air gets trapped in there. But when you add egg whites, now you're adding egg proteins that are creating a connection that fills up with syrups and other foods that creates walls that hold a lot of air. So that's the beauty of using an egg white. Why do we degrease our whip and our bowl but then add fat? The reason we do that is because if you are making an egg white meringue, like an Italian or a Swiss meringue, your egg whites want no fat. But then once it's all ready and you're ready to add the butter, you've got your meringue to the right consistency and you're adding the fat, then it no longer matters. But in order to get egg whites to build air, they can't have fat on because then the proteins can't connect, they're too slippery. Can I reduce the butter in these recipes? And that is such a great question because I have a friend who owns a bakery in Michigan who accidentally was making an Italian buttercream and left out half the butter, and it ended up being so light and fluffy, and the customers liked it better. And not only, and this is from a bakery's perspective, because you know you're always looking at what things cost, not only did it save him money, but people really liked the lightness. So how much butter can you leave out? Well, you'll have to test it. So these are the commercial egg whites. And some of these testers, the eggs just went because like the fat did not want to become cohesive. Some sucked it up right away. So that's why this test, I just can't recommend enough. So if you have How Baking Works and at the end of the fat chapter there are exercises, this is the one that I recommend doing. It's fascinating. Okay, so I need to do for 5 minutes. We're going to leave that on high for 5 minutes. And we're going to see what happens. I'm going to show you all my other testers. Yeah, I mean, you can play, but what I'm encouraging you to do is play with some kind of insight. Play with purpose. And don't be afraid, but before you move forward, justify why you're doing it. Predict what the outcome could be. Buttercream is about the fat you use. It's about mouthfeel. It's about how much moisture does it hold, how creamy does it end up, how much air does it hold, and then once you put it on a cake, a cupcake, or anywhere, or try to pipe it, is it holding the line, is it setting up, and then how does it taste at room temperature, because you should always eat cakes and buttercream at room temperature. So if you can't buy high ratio shortening, there's really no substitute. You would want to use butter, and I'm going to show you the results of this so that you can understand it in a physical way, which I think is really helpful. My buttercreams that I made on Wednesday have been in the refrigerator. You can leave them in the refrigerator for up to 7 days. They have to be brought back to room temperature before you mix them and use them or pipe them. But if you want to freeze them, you're going to put them in the smallest container they'll fit into, cover with plastic to touch, label the date, and then put them in the freezer for up to 3 months. Where would you recommend I start if I want to learn about baking instead of just recipe following? Great question. I would start with how baking works, and I would begin with very simple recipes, and before I even begin making it, I would, on a piece of paper, write down the ingredients. I would go to how baking works, and I would write down each ingredient's secondary ingredients, water content, fat content, solid content, anything that resonates with you. And that way, as you begin adding other ingredients and following the recipe, you will begin to internalize ingredient functions and how they affect each other. Because these ingredients don't just act one way. Butter does not act the same. You know butter doesn't act the same way if you cook it a certain way or you put it on toast versus whipping it for a buttercream. So how is it going to interact with the other ingredients, to the method that you're doing, and then ultimately to how it's baked or cooked or whatever else you do to it. So you break it down, use how baking works, and begin to build an intuition for how these ingredients behave. And then when you eat whatever you made, you're just kind of closing the loop. But anytime that you don't have those foundational understandings of ingredients, and then you make a swap, you really will never know if it worked out or didn't work out. Why? You'll think you did, but trust me, I know from experience, and also I get all the comments and questions from people. People DM me all the time. Why did it work out this one time and not the other time? That is why you have to be methodical and ask the why and then answer it through ingredient function. That's the best way to do it if you're interested in expanding your baking abilities. Somebody like me in the beginning, I just found recipes I could do really well that were really tasty, and then I just stuck with those. And so until I went back to school and learned more about it, I had to really just follow the rules. Okay, so this is the fun part. Let me turn this off. So this is where it gets really fun, and I'm going to show you guys everything so you can be up to speed with where I am. Okay, so first of all, this is every single one of these test frostings I did. They're not really frostings. What do they call it? Simple icing. They have exactly the same amount of 10x and egg white and the same amount of fat. They're just a different fat. So this is cream cheese icing in this particular test. That does not mean that's how my cream cheese icing would look. That means that is the effect of this test. So this is going to go into this deli cup because I am going to show you how all 7 fats compare, made the same way with the same ingredients in the same deli cup. It's fat, you're just gonna die. It's so cool. And if you are a teacher or, you have any opportunity to do this experiment as a teaching lesson, I think that this would be really fun for a group. It would be great with kids. I think that it's just an amazing exercise. All right. So I'm going to scrape the bowl because I did with each one because I don't want the results to be skewed. I want you to know that these are all equal amounts. Okay. Alrighty, here we go. Woo! I've been doing this since this morning, but it's exciting. Okay, so here are my... Okay, here we go. Okay, this is American butter, European butter, margarine, half Sweetex, half European butter, all Sweetex, all-purpose Crisco. So if you're talking about the kind of shortening that you get at the grocery store, this is Crisco. This is the cream cheese. This is margarine, okay? Now this is what is called table margarine, and it's meant to be soft at room temperature. You all know that. If you want to use a baker's margarine, like in sticks, and we didn't have it at our grocery store. If you want to use a baker's margarine, it's going to be firmer. This is meant to be soft. But when I opened the container, you could already see liquid. It was that soft. And when it went into the mixer, it was very, very soft. And let me see my notes. It absorbed the 10X really, really fast. It was already weeping liquid, and it barely even needed to be paddled. And it's crusting up, so it gets a crust, and it does not smell good. It doesn't smell good, and it's yellow, okay? So you can see the difference between the cream cheese color and the margarine is a little yellower. So this is the cream cheese, and you saw how liquidy. It's very liquidy. Remember I said cream cheese icing is really soft? See? So then you think, well, I'll just keep adding more 10X. That doesn't always work. The fat doesn't always do that. It doesn't do necessarily what you want it to do. So that's table margarine. If you're a vegan or vegetarian, you're maybe going to want to use margarine, but you're going to have to find the kind that's firmer. And they actually make margarine for doing puff pastry and all kinds of stuff. This is called a designer fat. It's got about the same amount as air in it as butter, but it's just made with like oil, and it's just different. So you will have to play with it a little bit. And again, I understand that I could have refrigerated it. I could have done a lot of things, but for this test, everything was room temperature, and that's what happened. So what you're noticing, and in this experiment, they talk about gravity and everything in terms of the weight, and I didn't get that scientific, but the Sweetex is the tallest. Can you see that? It's the fullest. And then the half Sweetex, half European butter is the second fullest. The Crisco, it looks kind of as full as these, but it feels a lot heavier, and there are no air pockets. There are barely any air pockets. These just feel lighter, and this is like plunk because the AP or all-purpose shortening can't hold the air that Sweetex can. Sweetex is designed with the magic of very, very strong emulsifiers to hold a lot of sugar and water. And then, very interestingly, the European butter needed a torch. If you guys have seen me use a torch to warm up the bowl, I couldn't have made it without warming up the bowl. And it has more fat at 83% than the American butter at 80%. That little bit of difference, the fat is that sensitive to temperature. It's a lot firmer than this. So you might think about that. If you're making a buttercream, choosing the kind of fat that you use is really important. And then I don't know if you can tell the color difference, but as we get more toward shortening, it gets a lot, the Crisco is the whitest. This is the half butter, half shortening. That's the Sweetex, and these are butters. And they're very close, but that's the difference you're getting. A little bit yellower and whiter. Now, if this was a real buttercream, I could whip it until it gets nice and light. It will lighten up. So yeah, I was surprised that the European butter stayed so firm. I was surprised I think the Sweetex and butter combo is really nice. And the Sweetex is the whitest. Interestingly, the egg whites sloshed around the most, but then they were absorbed the most readily, which was really interesting. And then cream cheese, just so you know, the next time you buy cream cheese, and I use Philadelphia cream cheese, you want to read the label, and this one says that it has carabine gum, okay? They add gums to this so that if you make a cheesecake or a buttercream, it's gonna hold together better. If you find a natural one that has no gums, you might find that either you don't get a nice emulsification or it weeps, even if it's a cheesecake. So that's kind of what you do with cream cheese, is to think about what lives inside, because cream cheese is made up of milk, cream, salt, the gum, and then a culture. It's not just dairy. So always read the labels. They're full of information and will help you decide what to use. It's so interesting. So whenever I'm not sure how to proceed, I just read the label. And like this is the margarine. It has soybean oil, palm oil, water, buttermilk. So, I mean, this might not even be vegan. And again, that's the interesting thing. You never know till you read the brand because all brands are different. This one has salt in it. It has a preservative. It has mono and diglycerides. It has lecithin, which is lecithin is an emulsifier that lives naturally in egg yolks, but it can be added. Lactic acid, artificial flavor, and beta carotene for color. And I'm telling you, it didn't smell good. I don't know why anyone eats this, honestly. It's gross. I think it's gross. And the butter is made with pasteurized cream and natural flavorings, just milk. That's it. It's unsalted. So fascinating. These are all three very different products. This is European buttercream, and it says right on that's 82% butterfat. So the rest of it isn't just water. It's proteins and sugars like lactose and protein parts that you can brown. But this one's 82% fat. The American butter was probably closer to 80. It just makes a huge difference. Huge. So before I move on, does anyone have any questions about that? And then I'll move those aside and we'll get on to some other stuff. So I can't believe that some of these are firm and some of these are literally liquid. I mean, look at that. That's the margarine. And that's the cream cheese. And it's exactly the same amount of fat. Woo! So this is the European butter. It's pretty firm. Pretty firm. I'll get rid of these. And if you're testing anything or playing with buttercreams, don't use anything expensive or flavorings. So this is a little bit softer. See how it fell off the thing a little bit, the spatula a little bit easier? And these again are just my room temperature, whatever my kitchen happens to be. This is half fat, half butter. The kind of cake decorators that work out of their home that are in the cottage industry, the difference between them and a decent bakery or the grocery store is that the grocery store is going to be 100% Sweetex and the home baker is probably going to do a half and half or some form because butter is very expensive. But this is going to give you, it holds a lot of air. It's very light and soft. So, I mean, really that's why people like it because the Sweetex gives you the ability to hold a lot, but that butter gives you a nice stable flavor and a richness. Because nobody's going to say that they like shortening buttercream best. You're going to do a blind taste test, it's going to taste terrible. So this is the Crisco only, and it's just very dense. It doesn't hold a ton of air, and you know, sometimes people will use Crisco when they're making like a dummy cake, a fake one, because it's very white, and it is a little more dense and, you know, a little bit faker. And then this is the Sweetex. So and it's crusting up a little bit and it's very, very airy. Can you see all that texture? That's actually really hard to work with when you frost a cake because you can't smooth it out. If you want to get rid of those sorts of air bubbles, you're going to put it a little bit higher than the paddle. The buttercream, you want it to come above here and do it on low for like 10 minutes. It'll knock those air bubbles out. So that's basically my experiment. It's what I've been working on this morning. And if you are interested in learning more about how the fats actually feel, how much moisture they absorb and how they work, how baking works has a lot of tests, and the simple icing test is the best. I'm gonna go move this over here. This is the thermometer I use for my Swiss and Italian meringue buttercream, okay? This is called a thermocoupler, and this is where it takes the temperature. So I rest this on the bottom of my pan, and that does not affect this part. This is where the liquid is going to be. The other question I had was about thermometers that are infrared. And these infrared thermometers are really great for taking the temperature of something that is flat. Chocolate that's just sitting there, a cooktop that's not sizzling, but it is not good for doing sugar work because of all the bubbles on the sugar. So it's not good for a lot of things. So you have to be really careful about assuming that your infrared thermometer is good for everything. Just read the instructions and how it's supposed to be used. So a lot of people have also asked me about when can you use a buttercream. If you are making your European buttercreams, you can use them right now. Go ahead, make it, and get it on your cake. And if you are going to refrigerate it, I recommend you take it out of the refrigerator the night before, which is what I did last night. The European buttercreams are based on egg. Meringue powder is an egg powder. It's been dried. So if you're thinking of royal icing, buttercream icing, American buttercream that takes meringue powder, you are getting the benefits of an egg white. The benefits of an egg white are when the proteins of the egg white connect and create some strength so that you can hold more water. If you missed my live with the lemon pound cake, it's over on YouTube. I edit them. You have part 1 is Wednesday, part 2 are Sundays. Oh my gosh, you use Costco butter and it's acting different. Here's the interesting thing. Through all of these experiments, I've been finding out that little by little manufacturers have been changing things. First of all, I have a Cheaters cake recipe that is genius and it's really good. And it would save a lot of people a lot of time if they just skip to the bag of cake mix and do this. It's got a lot of butter, eggs, cream, and some water in it. Back in the day, a cake mix was 18 ounces for a box. They're now down to like 13, and that just happened a few years ago. These manufacturers can change anything they want about a formula. I make Christina Tosi's Ritz Crunch. It's so good. You have to bake it till it's really dark. Well, I noticed the last time that I did it that it didn't feel right. So then I Googled it and I found out that all these people were suspicious that they had changed the recipe, and I think they have. And I don't know why they did, but with the butter and them changing, they probably changed something major. They could have reduced the fat by 0.5% or 1%, and it's going to make a huge difference. Well, so SMH says, my wife and I always argue about dry versus wet measuring. A scale. That's my answer. I don't use cups or spoons and never would. And if I did measure liquids, it'd be in a liquid measure. And if I measure dry, it would be in a dry measure. Never the twain shall meet. But I don't recommend either one at all. I recommend going by grams and using a scale and a mini scale. Yep, if Costco butter changed their recipe, you can still use it. And this is where I want you to think like an ingredient. Just because someone says your oven doesn't work or your oven's too hot or whatever, if you get an oven thermometer, you can dial it in. If you find out what lives in the Costco butter, you can use it. You can just adjust your recipes and adjust what you do. That's the power of ingredient label reading and understanding fat contents, moisture contents, and things like that. So I would, maybe email them and ask. I think that'd be great. I bet you a lot of people would love to know. Hi, Zambia. Thank you. Your oven doesn't work? Oh, no. I was without an oven for a week here, and I switched to doing things on the stovetop, but it's definitely not good if you can't bake. So meringue powder is a stabilizer. It's basically dehydrated egg whites with a little bit of flavoring and maybe an emulsifier. All of these things are going to make your American buttercream, your royal icing, just a little smoother. And Sweetex, like I said, I buy a 50-pound box of it. You really want to make sure you don't get an old one. If it starts getting lumpy, those are fat crystals that can be caused by them being too old, time temperature abuse, and things like that. I found Sweetex online, typically with cake decorating companies that sell cake decorating tools and supplies. You can call a local bakery or a local cake decorating supply company and ask if they can sell you a pound, 2 pounds, 3 pounds. But if you buy Sweetex or Alpine online in the 1 to 3 pound range, it's highway robbery. So, it was like $20 for a pound. So it's a total ripoff. I'd rather have 50 pounds and not go through it in a year than spend 20 on 1 pound, which I know I'm going to use up really fast. I have a 1970s bakery cookie I use it for, a buttercream I use it for, a high ratio cake recipe those are all on my link tree, and they all use Sweetex. So if you're looking for a reason to justify a purchase, I think those are good reasons. And I do like equal parts shortening and butter for an American buttercream. If you start playing with those ratios, you will get different results. More shortening will have a higher melting point and it'll be whiter. More butter will have better flavor. It'll have a lower melting point. So on a hot, humid day, your frosting might fall apart, but it's gonna have a yellow tinge, and so you can play. Crisco is a no-go. That's an all-purpose shortening, and it does not have emulsifiers and hold the air that you need it to. And in order to get your American buttercream less gritty, you are going to want to somehow allow the powdered sugar particles to get a little more hydrated. And one way to do that is to add either a little bit of water to the formula or cream or milk and let it sit overnight and give it time and move it around. So it's still gonna be grittier than a European buttercream. And I mostly did Italian neoclassic buttercream for my entire cake decorating career. And it was a little dense. So if you're looking for something a little bit lighter, your Swiss buttercream is gonna be a little lighter. And maybe you back off the amount of butter that you're using and whip some more air into it. French buttercream is just like an Italian buttercream, only it's made with egg yolks. And it's really meant to be very rich and as a filling. And I love it for macaron. So the Russian buttercream and the French buttercream I love as a filling. You don't typically cover a cake with that. All right, what else? Someone asked me what's my most used utensil. I'm obsessed with spatulas. Spatulas are so interesting because they come in, like this is heat safe. This is by ThermalWorks, the same one that did my timer. I don't like how flexible it is. I wish it would be stiffer, but this is not gonna melt if I put it in a really hot syrup. This is one of my favorites, and they don't even make them anymore. People complain because they get dirty. You're not supposed to leave it on here when you wash it. You're supposed to take them apart and then let it air dry completely. But again, I'm really into how flexible and stiff is the top of the spatula. I bought all of these Le Creuset, not in love with them at all. This is meant to get the corners of your square and then the rounds of your bowl. Oh, I bought a giant one. This is for heat proof. And I do like the big one because, you know, I can do like a larger batch of something. This is your commercial grade, and I like that it's stiff and it will soften up over time. But it's skinny and kind of hurts your hands and you can't grab onto it. So the handle is really important too. I hate those teeny tiny little mini, I don't like mini spatulas. And this one's a spoon, and it's really not good for most of what you do unless you want to spoon something out. So I keep this in a separate drawer. First of all, these Exo glass spatulas, they come in all these different sizes, and these will go up to a really high temperature. So you can tell I've used this to caramelize nuts and to do a lot of things that burn, you know, like most plastic. But then if you have a big clean one that you haven't used much, it's really great for gently stirring chocolate. Exo glass goes up to 430 degrees Fahrenheit and 220 Celsius. So these are great for caramel making. You won't lose your plastic in your food. Someone asked if an Italian meringue tastes like marshmallow. Kind of, and that's why, and I did a video this week of it on the plate and then being torched, then it totally tastes like marshmallow. Did you know in Portuguese the name for spatula is the name of the dictator Salazar? No way, that is really interesting. You know, a spatula, back in the day when parents used to spank their kids with a wooden spoon, I think a really big spatula is sort of like a similar type thing. It would really hurt to be spanked with it, so maybe that's a good comparison. My deli cups that I use, I buy in 3 sizes. You can tell this one's starting to get warped. Eventually it will lose its viability. I use these over and over again, but they are hand wash only. When they crack or warp too much, I get rid of them, I recycle them. And they're really not meant for the microwave, but I do use them if something's going to be heated just for a few seconds at a time. This is a cold deli cup, not the hot kind. And you need to get lids separately, and the lids for the hot and the cold they don't work. So you have to make sure you get cold bottoms and the cold lids, and so that they fit. I like a smaller mixer. The 4.5 quart mixer, for all the testing that I do, allows me to do smaller batches and not waste as much ingredient. Testing everything out. What is ermine frosting? And I'm sure someone's gonna say I pronounce it wrong, but there are a couple of different kinds of frostings that are in addition to American buttercream and European buttercream. Ermine buttercream includes flour, so that's the stabilizer. You're using flour that's been lightly cooked, and that thickens it. And those are traditional on a red velvet cake, but also I make a cake for my husband that's called the Bohemian Poppy Seed Cake, and that's the frosting. And it's got a little richer, less sweet flavor, but if someone is gluten-free, then that won't work for them. And then there is Decorator's buttercream that is for practice, and that has no added flavoring, anything extra like butter, which would be expensive. And you can pipe with it, practice with it, and scrape it up and use it indefinitely. And then the last thing is rose buttercream, which has a higher firmness, so you can make flowers that have edges that stay really nice and you can lift things up. It's called rose buttercream. Often people will pipe roses with it on a tray, and then when they're dry, you can just lift them and put them on a cake easily. So on my Substack, I have things that I think about in addition to the videos that I make. So I do lives on TikTok. In between my lives, I post videos related to the subject. So right now, if you want to go to my regular videos, you are going to get a video about the raspberry puree that I'm going to be using today, the Russian buttercream that I played with. And if you go to my Substack, you will have these notes. And what I did is I went through the American buttercream and all the European, and I wrote the notes about them, how they're used, what ingredients and the method is used in general. These are very general ideas, the performance, the color, and the flavor. And if you go to the Substack and print this out, you can use it to take your notes. And this will help you begin to gather the information and tie together all the ideas so that you can pick the best buttercream for the job, for whatever you want it to be. And it comes down to pipeability, flavor, texture, ease of making it, storage, and then final product. The color, the flavor, and how does it hold up in the heat or as a filling or as a covering. So those are the main things. I don't know what a mock Swiss meringue is. What is that? Can you tell me what a mock Swiss meringue is, and then I can tell you the difference? Meringue powder is a stabilizer, just like non-fat milk solids are, which is powdered milk, cornstarch, things like that are stabilizers. So powdered sugar is a stabilizer as a general rule, but it's your sweetener. Oh, mock uses pasteurized egg whites and powdered sugar. Oh, you don't make a meringue. Oh, you know what? There are a lot of buttercreams I make. I have a chocolate buttercream recipe that once you've incorporated the cocoa powder 10x in butter, you finish with pasteurized egg whites and it loosens it up. Never heard it called a mock before, but it's one of my favorite. What that does is it smooths it out. Obviously, egg whites loosen things up and can help you aerate, and it gives a really nice mouthfeel. You definitely need to use pasteurized because it is not safe to use fresh egg whites that have not been cooked. Powdered sugar takes sucrose and they use like a grinder, like big, maybe stainless steel, and they grind it 10 times and then they stabilize it with cornstarch because sucrose is hygroscopic. It is always the bully in the bowl. It's going to take the water and hold on to it. And when, sugar clumps, that's what's happening. It's grabbing all the moisture in the air. So if you were to just grind up sugar and put it in a container, even if the container's closed, eventually it's going to clump. So the cornstarch prevents that from happening. Can you recommend any books for ingredient knowledge, their role in a recipe, please? Yes, How Baking Works by Paula Fagoni is my #1 recommendation. And if you are interested in somebody who combines really great recipes with ingredient function, Rose Levy-Berenbaum, the Cake Bible, the Cookie Bible, will give you that. I taught myself to bake out of the Cake Bible and I can recommend it. All right, so we made a lot of buttercreams so many. Okay, so we made Swiss meringue buttercream. I made the Russian buttercream, American buttercream, and this is the neoclassic buttercream. And that is made with corn syrup, so you don't need a thermometer. And I have some Italian meringue that I never added butter to, so I can do that today. And it has separated a little bit, but I'm gonna whip it together and then I'm gonna add butter to it. But here are my flavorings. This is chocolate. And when you're choosing flavorings for your buttercreams, you want to take into account how sweet are they. if you take your sweetest buttercream, let's say American buttercream, if it's already sweet, how do I balance it out? So if you have something really, really sweet, then you want to use a darker chocolate or maybe even unsweetened. And then this is my simple syrup, lemon simple syrup from making the pound cakes, which is sugar. And if I added this to my American buttercream, it would help get rid of some of that grittiness. But you want to make sure that you're not adding too much so you make it too loose. All right, so I made this raspberry puree. All of this I'm going to show you, and I have a video on my TikTok, and this is just frozen raspberries, strained, and then cooked down. And this is a Rose Levy Berenbaum. I did this when I had my cake business, and this is what I used to flavor the buttercreams. I did not put this on the cake. I put it in the buttercreams. It turns it a beautiful pinkish red, and it's so intense. Now, a lot of you have said, you know, you can use a food mill or a juicer and all these things. You don't want to use fresh raspberries. You want to use frozen berries because the water inside the raspberry needs to be frozen so that those water crystals break the cell wall of the fruit so that you can access all the liquid in the pulp. Now, I use just a sieve that I push it with a spatula back and forth. That's why I did it by hand. So a lot of people recommend all these different tools and everything, but I always offer you the most basic thing, and then if you have fancy tools, go for it. I was self-taught for a long time. When I was 41, I went back to school, and being self-taught, and I've talked to a lot of teachers and a lot of professionals about this. There's nothing wrong with being self-taught. However, I still think you need mentors and peers to discuss this stuff with, because if you've gotten to a point where you're not really learning, and I just couldn't teach myself. I can't read other people's research and their articles about what they learned. It just doesn't sink in. And when you're working at home, you're not really doing like this amount of work, and the learning is just really slow. So my learning really kicked in when I went back to school, and then it kicked in overdrive when I became a teacher. And the more I know about all this stuff, the more I know I don't know. Like the more I learn, the more I know there's more to learn. It's just an endless possibility kind of endeavor. I'll be learning my whole life. So the Russian buttercream, I am not going to flavor. I like the flavor that it is. I always cover up buttercreams with plastic to touch, and this is what the Russian buttercream looks like. So Sugarology came and told me that these kind of buttercreams get 10% less sweet the day after. So if you taste them right after you make them, they will become less sweet by 10% the next day. So you definitely want to try things the day that you made them and then try them again to compare. The neoclassic is the one that I taught myself to do when I had my business, and I was afraid of using a thermometer. So I learned this method using corn syrup instead of a thermometer, and you just boil it with sugar and pour it over your whipped egg yolk or egg white. And I taught myself to do it. I batched it up. I had a 20-quart mixer. I would make huge batches of it, and it's wonderful. And it's very smooth. And in order to use this, this has been in my refrigerator, and then last night I took it out to come to room temp. I can't just use this right out of here. It's too dense. So I would put this on the whip or the paddle to lighten it, and then I would fill a cake with it. This was made with egg yolk, so I always recommend the egg yolk go on the inside as the filling, not as the outside. My pastry school experience was at Milwaukee Area Technical College. I love technical colleges, and I ended up teaching at 2 of them. And then I went to a private school, which was the French pastry school, and they are no longer in business, I think because of COVID. They have another form of it online, but I'm not familiar with it. Yeah, it's okay to leave it on the counter overnight. This is a cooked product. When you add that hot syrup at 125 degrees Celsius to the egg white or the egg yolk, you are pasteurizing it. So this is shelf stable, and buttercreams can sit on the counter for days, but you know, I like to refrigerate cakes for transport so they're not sloshing around. Typically, this is what I will do. In my cake business, I would make decorations and make buttercreams and things that could go and be stored. But on Thursday would be my baking day. And as soon as my cakes were cool, I would fill and frost them with a crumb coat. They'd go in the fridge. Then on Fridays, I would finish coat, pipe, and everything. Now, I didn't do a lot of decorated piping. I did gum paste flowers. So a lot of that stuff would be at the venue. I would drop off a cake and then I would add all the sugar flowers on site. So Thursday, bake and crumb coat, fill and crumb coat. Fridays, finish coat, borders, and then pack it up, get it all ready, goes back in the refrigerator. Transport it cold early enough that that entire cake can come to room temp for serving. Talk to the people who are going to cut your cake. Tell them not to do it way in advance. And none of it goes in the refrigerator. If somebody cuts your cake and then they store it in a refrigerator, it's going to dry it out, like if they've cut it. So it's really important how things are handled through the entire process of the food, right up until it gets to the customer on a plate. You don't need a box unless you're transporting. Transporting in a box is to keep it food safe so that debris doesn't get on it. Sometimes boxes can store in the humidity and cause problems. So usually cakes go in the refrigerator uncovered and get boxed for transport. I would probably box it and have it in the cooler so that the temperature is more stable on the way to being delivered. The buttercream seals the cake. Once you do a good crumb coat and there are no holes allowing moisture out, and you are combining your home fridge with a cake, cakes are like sponges and so is buttercream. It's going to absorb bad smells. You have to be very careful about, it's a sponge. You don't want your buttercreams or cake smelling like garlic or onion or anything like that. And that's a problem in a lot of commercial kitchens. I mean, refrigerators can end up smelling crazy. That's why if you're buying something from a cake only, you're more likely to have somebody who kind of knows specifically how to handle cakes. This will be 7 days in the refrigerator. The rule is anything that you make has 7 days. That's ready to eat food. Oh my gosh. I mean, the habit of smelling tools, you go into any professional kitchen, a baker, we're constantly smelling deli cups because we don't want to use the stuff that the culinary people are using because we don't want that overlap. And in fact, I've heard stories of pastry chefs taking sheet pans and drilling holes in the sides so that the culinary people, you know, they need those to be sealed so nothing spills out. It's kind of rude. Do I still need to use room temp butter for Italian, but even if it's in a hot country like? That's a great question. What I would do, and I know what you're talking about, when butter is truly in a humid, when you're truly in a hot, humid environment, butter can almost melt on its own on the counter. So what I recommend is bringing it out maybe as you're working and kind of dial in that time because you need it soft enough to be emulsified. If any of you are having buttercreams or any problems with all the little lumps and the broken parts, you either have too hot of a meringue and too cold of a butter, or when things in temperature are too far apart, they're not going to emulsify. If you add the butter too fast, you're also not going to emulsify it. So emulsification happens over temperature and time. Especially, you know, we're talking about buttercreams this week. So if you live in a really hot environment, I'm not saying just use shortening, but you might want to stabilize your buttercreams to a point where they don't need to be refrigerated. It's just tough. I mean, we get hot here in the summer, the butter almost melts. So it's a toggle. I call it a toggle. And sometimes gel colors don't want to emulsify in buttercreams. Yeah, absolutely. That's what I call tempering. It's not really tempering, but you want to take out a little bit of buttercream into a smaller bowl and your paste icing. And you want to get that really smooth and then add that to a larger quantity. So you're slowly introducing it to the buttercream. You probably want to be using more of I use everything from paste, which has wonderful color, to the gel, to the liquid. But all buttercreams are different. So you always want to take a little bit out and get it in there. Just like if you are adding hot to make a pastry cream, you want to add a little bit of the hot milk to a little bit of the egg before you go throwing it in the whole pot so you don't scramble it. It's a little bit at a time. Time and temperature is allowing you to get the two things together. So you can also, if you're making an Italian meringue, you can add the color to the meringue when it's mixing, or especially if you're using a powdered food color, to the sugar cooking. Okay, so I guess we want to make a little bit of flavored buttercream, right? We want to kind of see what it looks like. Oops. So I'm going to use an American buttercream because it's the whitest, and I'll show you what I mean. And I definitely want to leave the plastic on American buttercream because it crusts up. It'll dry out and it'll be miserable. So you can't just leave this buttercream in a bowl without either a damp cloth or a plastic over it. It'll dry out and you'll get chunks. Is there an alternative book for gluten-free baking? You know, I have Philip Corey's book, and someone recommended, I'll go get them. I have 2 books. Let me go get them. I've been so busy getting this all going and everything that I haven't been doing as much other baking. But I love Philip Corey, and he has a great TikTok. But this is vegan, plant-based, and a lot of it is gluten-free, and it's a lovely book, and he's so smart. He has QR codes on so many QR codes so that you can watch videos that go along with his recipes. I mean, that's just next level. And then one of my viewers recommended Gluten-Free Flours by Alice Medrich, and she's the real deal. Like, when you guys ask me who do I like and not like, she's the real deal. And I have 2 recipes in here that were recommended that I'm going to do, but these alternative flours are not just, you know, gluten-free mixes. They are learning how. So anytime you're in the vegan or gluten-free space, you're really into recipe development, you really need to understand what your ingredients are doing, because if you don't know how wheat flour works or what the difference between whole wheat and bread flour is, then you are going to have trouble gluten-free baking. So books like this, and it's, you know, one of James Beard. I mean, this is a fabulous book, and I like it a lot. And so those are 2 books with people who know what they're doing, tried and true, and they want their recipes to work. Okay, so this is the American buttercream. You can see as it sits in here, it compresses, and this is the Swiss. It feels much lighter, and even though it took on the plastic's shape, this looks and feels like butter, and to me this looks more like American buttercream, like 10X. So I'm going to use the American buttercream to add some raspberry puree. And I'm not going to put a ton because I want to do a couple different examples. But this is the American buttercream I made the other day. So you can kind of see those air holes. Those make it really hard to frost a cake without a bunch of, you know, air holes kind of showing. So again, I'm not going to do a ton. But if I were to use a cake, and this has been in my fridge for 5 days, I pull it out last night and I go to make it, it's going to go on the mixer so that I can bring it back to a nice texture, because this is going to settle with gravity and whatnot and just become more dense. And I don't want it to be like that when I put it on a cake. And if I were to store this, I would flatten this out and put plastic to touch and then put it away. The puree is thin enough that you would not, it's not a filling in and of itself. It's too thin. Okay, so this does thicken up in the refrigerator, but this is how thin it is. But it's very red and glossy. When you make it, you cook it down, and what's shocking if you watch my video is how I whisk it, how much water evaporates that lives in a raspberry. It's fascinating. So I cook it down, cook it down, cook it down. I add lemon juice because it brightens up the flavor and keeps it bright red, because acid can help that. But I added a tiny bit of sugar, but you can make this as sweet as you want. You can put it in a squeeze bottle and do a pretty squeeze on a plate and just put a dessert on top of it. It's lovely. So I would rather use this if I had a wedding cake or a pretty celebration cake, cut a beautiful slice, put it on the plate, and then take a squeeze bottle and do some pretty dollops or drops on the plate or on the ice cream or the whipped cream or something like that. But for this, I'm going to add a little bit at a time. And if you had a huge batch, you could just pour it in. But let's see. And I'll show you once it gets mixed in a little. Now, because this is liquid, it's going to thin this out. So you have to be, you know, aware of one thing affecting the other. And before I even turn it up, I want to show you what it looks like. So I haven't even mixed it. Can you see how let me bring it over there. You can see how the red, that's the puree on the paddle, and this is it beginning to mix in, okay? and then some is on the sides of the bowl, and okay? So you're not necessarily mixing to color, you're mixing to consistency and to flavor. But when you take this and put it in a cake, what I would do, and I like a cake, I don't like a chunk of cake, frosting chunk of cake. I want you to torte that cake so you have at least 1, 2, 3, and you want to put buttercreams toward the bottom. So when you eat a cake and your fork goes through, you need that buttercream to support the cake, and I might do this. Pink raspberry buttercream, white Italian meringue that has no butter in it, and then on the top, some lemon cream with fresh berries. So when you cut into it, you have this beautiful cake on the plate, but this pink adds a pop of color. Just beautiful. So when you make a cake, and one of the reasons people don't like cake is because they're boring. So you need to think about cake as a dessert, and when you put your fork, I like a tall cake. So I like it torted so I have 5 fillings. You torte each cake, and then the filling between the torte, filling between the torte. When I use a fork, this part of my cake is buttercream and fresh berry, and this part is the meringue and lemon cream. It becomes a dessert, so every bite can be just a little bit different, and that is how a really good cake is made. And there's no reason cake can't be just like a plated dessert in the form of a cake. Okay, so I want to see if this has any flavor. So we're not just doing it to color, we're doing it to flavor as well. And I will tell you, American buttercream is not really the best thing for the puree because, well, depending. I guess to stabilize it, I would whip it, but the butter of a Swiss meringue is going to hold more liquid. But let me see how this is doing. Fresh berries are very expensive and they can be problematic, and they really need to be refrigerated right up until the end. It tastes pretty raspberry. You don't need that much. So if you're going to do this, just be very clear. Your puree is not going to be the consistency of mine. You might cook this down to half this. That's less water that goes in here, and this is the color. And it has a really good forward raspberry flavor. So I can add more, I can do whatever I want, but it is going to affect the texture. So that's one flavor. So a puree would not be okay. No, it would not be appropriate for a filling unless you're going to add it to something more stable like a buttercream, a whipped cream. This would be beautiful in a whipped cream. You can stabilize whipped cream with gelatin. You can stabilize your puree with gelatin. So there are a lot of ways to go. I'm going to put this buttercream in my deli cup so you can look at it. So if you were to do this, I don't recommend testing it when you have a party or you've promised to do a cake for someone. You need to do some pre-testing, and you're going to be looking at flavor, texture, and color. So this is nice and pink. It has a really good pure raspberry flavor. And you can make that puree out of a lot of fruit. Blueberries, strawberries, all kinds of things. And you are going to get a really intense flavor. So see? So look how pink that is. Isn't that pretty? Love it. And it could go pinker if I wanted it to. Yes, it is magic, isn't it? Okay, so do I have another bowl? So this is the meringue I made the other day. And it did kind of separate, but I went ahead. It's an Italian meringue with no butter in it. So I told you guys how much I love taking this and making it into a frosting. I will take Italian meringue and add puree, and you're going to get a really, really pure flavor. Let me add some in here. And I would just fold it so as not to deflate the meringue. And you will notice how much redder this stays because there's no butter in it. And this meringue's a little runny because it's been through the business all week. It sat on the counter. So if this was nice and stiff, like it was when I first made it, I would fold this meringue, the puree into here, and this would go into the center of a cake, and it would be really, really pretty. Let me see how this tastes. It's just a really intense flavor. So I'm a huge fan of purees. I hope you try. And then let's try a little bit of the simple syrup and the chocolate. How's that sound? So this is the Swiss buttercream. I'm not going to do much because I'm going to do something else with the chocolate. I'm going to use a whip just to see. And then I'm going to do chocolate melted. I'm going to do dried freeze fruit. That's about it. Yeah, chocolate buttercream. Well, I mean, I have some that are made with cocoa powder and 10X, and they are a little gritty. I like them, and people like them, but this is going to be the Swiss buttercream with melted chocolate, which I'll just put this in the microwave, 45 seconds. I do 45 seconds and then 15-second intervals, and I stir, but don't over stir. So with buttercream that's Swiss with real butter, if you do cold butter or buttercream and you beat it too fast or hard, you could knock the water out of it and break the emulsion. So you definitely want to wait until it gets warm. I never use natural cocoa powder. I always use Dutch processed. I like the color, the flavor, and typically the acidity is really nice with all of the sweetness that we've got going on. Okay, so you saw how firm this is. This is firm like this, right? Chunks. This is what it looks like now. And I didn't really whip it like crazy. And if I wanted to whip it, this is very dense. That's how dense it is, but it's definitely getting smoother. Okay, so when you think about emulsification, if I add this liquid, I could overwhelm this buttercream very quickly. So I'm actually going to use a spoon and just do a little at a time. I'm going to turn this up just a little. This is my simple syrup with Trinity Bitters. Simple syrup has sugar in it. Buttercream has sugar in it, so I need to think about how to balance out those flavors. Eli asked about the lemon cream. You'll have to watch my videos or I'll have to do something on it. I don't know why it doesn't have instructions. So what happens with the butter is it can tend to like reject the liquid, but if you go slow and you pay attention to temperature and how slowly you add it, it'll come right together. So I'm just curious if this is going to take much flavor on quickly. So it's still firm, and you saw I added a couple tablespoons. It's just a little bit of buttercream. I want to taste it and see where it's headed. So you can add lemon cream or curd, which has a lot more flavor than this, but it's light, very light. I'm going to add air and add a little bit more. Most people don't like zest in their buttercream. I don't recommend it. People really don't like the texture, especially large groups of people. So Swiss and Italian buttercream are very dense. There's nothing wrong with lowering the amount of butter or whipping a lot more air into this. Let me see. I mean, it's mild lemon flavor. It's just an idea, but you can try different things, just keeping in mind that some things are very thin and already have sugar in them. Other things are thicker. You know, they might have a fruit that's got natural pectin that's going to thicken up. So think about those kinds of things. So after these have been in there for 45 seconds, they're kind of sticking to the bottom. So I like to just scrape the bottom, and from here on out, 15-second intervals. So I have never used freeze-dried fruit to flavor anything, and I did order powdered fruit from nuts.com and some more, and it did not come. There was a delay in the shipping, which is a bummer, but I do have freeze-dried blueberries that we are going to add. So here is the chocolate. This is real chocolate. It's dark, very dark. And you don't want to over agitate real chocolate. So you just want to do that. It's going to go back in. All right, so I'm going to grind this freeze-dried blueberry. It's freeze-dried. No moisture, not like dehydrated or a dried berry. No moisture. The way you melt chocolate chips or chocolate's the same, and I'm not stirring it, I'm just lifting it off of the bottom so it doesn't get scorched. When you get close to all the chunks being melted, you can stop because it'll continue to melt. You don't need to cook this until it's all the way melted. I will be posting this video of this live as soon as I can get it edited. So it will be on YouTube, where I have the video from Wednesday and from Sundays. Every week, part 1 is Wednesday, part 2 is Sunday. When you add this chocolate to your buttercream, you have to be careful that you're not hitting the metal, which is cold. So you can pour it in and then lower your attachment, or there's a few ways to do it. So I'm gonna do 15 more seconds and then be done with this, and there'll be little chunks. All right, here we go. I've never done this before, so it's kind of an experiment. You can buy freeze-dried fruit powders, and they will impart color and flavor and no moisture, which is really great. So this appears to have ground up really now. Oh, wow, yeah, it's pulverized, so that's good. Very good to know. It's completely pulverized. Not even any chunks, not a problem. I really like that. That's impressive. So my question is, I was wondering, can this be added to a meringue during the meringue whipping part? And then you'll get less grit. That's my question. Okay. So here's the chocolate, it's all melted. Looks good. Actually, I'm gonna take this out and add a different butter. I don't want the lemon interfering with the chocolate. And I don't really know what's going to happen, so I'll transfer it. I'll just put it in a deli cup. Is the puree too thin for a cake? Is that why? If you use my fruit puree is a coulis, which is like more of a sauce. And that is just going to soak into the cake, which I suppose if you have a sponge cake or something that needs a syrup, it might be okay. But for a high ratio, typical American, you know, butter cake, it's not really appropriate. You're going to end up with a soggy crumb. So this is my lemon and this is my raspberry. This one's got a stronger flavor. The color really doesn't matter. That's why you have to taste it, because that puree is really red. And this is the lemon flavor from the simple syrup. I'm going to put a little more buttercream in here, and then I'm going to add chocolate to it. Melted chocolate. If you were to add cocoa powder to any of these buttercreams, you would be imparting this gritty, drier, and that's going to change the consistency. All right, so I'm gonna pour this in after I get it going. I have a banana bread recipe on my link tree, and I've done some videos on it under quick breads, under that playlist. High ratio means that if you eat a cake from a box or a cake in the United States from a bakery, and from most people, most places, the grocery store, that's when you think of high ratio. Really soft, tender crumb, lots of little bubbles on the crumb, delicate, sweet, high, tall. The volume of sugar and eggs and everything that make it wonderful, it creates a lot of little bubbles that disperse throughout the batter, and that creates that light, tender crumb. A sponge cake is when you make an egg foam and then you fold other things in, and those tend to need syrups or things to moisten them, but they're two different kinds of cakes. They are foundational. But all right, so let's take a look at this guy so you guys can see. And this is a Swiss meringue. So you can see around the edges, it's not really incorporated, but then this is really smooth. And my kitchen is a little bit cold. I don't need to use the torch, but I'm gonna push down the parts that aren't in there. And then I'm gonna pour a little bit of chocolate in there. And we're gonna see what our chocolate buttercream looks like. All right, so I'm gonna add the chocolate to this. And I'm going to go ahead and pour some toward the bottom of the bowl. And I'm just gonna estimate what I'm gonna need. And again, with chocolate, you don't want to throw it on the whip or on the side of the bowl where it's cold because it will solidify. So I'm going to turn it up. If you have problems with chocolate being added to your buttercream because the buttercream is really cold or the chocolate is starting to get hard, you're going to make sure that your two things are closer in temperature so they go together. All right, so here's the initial results, and I'm going to taste it to see what kind of flavoring it has. So you see how light in color it is. Now you have a couple choices. You can continue to add chocolate, and just so you know, chocolate is a natural stabilizer because when it firms up, it gets hard, right? And it stabilizes, firms, hardens, thickens, stronger. Just because you're adding more chocolate doesn't mean that's better, and it's really never going to get that dark. One of the ways you can darken it is to add a little drop of red food color if you're interested. Natural colors don't bother me whatsoever. But I want to see if this even tastes chocolatey, so I'm going to taste it, but that's how light it is. So the little secret when you're making chocolate glazes and you want your chocolate to be a richer chocolate color is to definitely add a little bit of red food coloring. It's not that chocolatey. So I'm going to go ahead and add what I have here. And if you were doing this for anybody, selling this, planning on doing this, chocolate buttercream with real chocolate, you need to dial it in. Don't just do it at the last minute. And when I say dial it in, I mean play with it before you promise somebody that you're going to make it for them. So I'm going to show you what it looks like. You can see how this center part's where the chocolate is, and you've got your messy edges, and it's feeling cold. So I'm going to take this chocolate and scrape everything in a little spatula. But if you start adding the chocolate and it solidifies into little bits and chunks of chocolate, you have a temperature issue, and you should have maybe mixed the chocolate in with a little buttercream. Like I could take some buttercream and mix it into the chocolate and then add that there. But those are all the kinds of things you'll have to think about as you proceed. Because again, I'm not telling you a recipe. I'm not telling you exactly what to do. I'm telling you how to think. All right, so I'm going to turn this up and see if it tastes good. And so here's a little buttercream, and let's see how. Let me add a little buttercream in a bowl just for fun. So when I add chocolate to the buttercream, it's going to set up more firm than the one that has the raspberry in it, just because chocolate, when it sets, is firm. And you do not need to use a refrigerator to firm all this stuff up. Things will firm up on their own at room temp. So you could take little bits and do it here and then add this to the buttercream if you want to. So just to utilize all my ingredients, I'm going to go ahead and take these out of here. And everything that I've used today is not wasted. I can freeze and save it and use it for if we make cakes, we can do the demo. Now it tastes chocolatey. Whipped ganache is amazing. Love it. So this is still a really light color, and some of you may not like that. Some of you may want it to be much darker, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're adding more chocolate. You might add a little bit of red food coloring, or if you're like me, just leave it. I like natural stuff. I don't care that the flavor or color isn't always there. So this is the silkiest. Silky, silky, silky. So you could ice the outside of a cake with this. Be absolutely beautiful. And you can put it on the inside. And it's just different than others, but it's definitely good. So I'm doing I did the American buttercream with the raspberry puree. And then this is the Swiss with the lemon. And now I'm doing the chocolate with the Swiss. I'm going to do one more. I'm going to show you what I'm going to do. The Italian meringue that I made on Wednesday that's been sitting in a bowl. And I am going to add the powdered blueberries to it and see how it incorporates before I add any butter to it. So because this is a meringue made with egg whites, I'm going to clean the bowl with a little bit of vinegar just to make sure that whatever fat I have residually in here will not ruin the meringue. Because The meringue gets ruined. I want to kind of know why, and I want to eliminate some of the variables. And vinegar, white vinegar, does a good job of clearing away the fat that's left behind. Not everywhere, it's not perfect. Because egg whites like acid, they get stronger that way. They don't like fat. All right, so here's my Italian meringue from the other day. We did not have time for it to get cool, and I decided I did not want to add butter to it. So here it is. It's separated a little bit, but I'm gonna put it on my mixer and I'm gonna see what happens. So this is a little bit of an experiment. This is the meringue, and some of the liquid has seeped out of it, but that will get incorporated right back in. And that's just the cooked sugar and water that's seeped out. Because it's been since last Wednesday, and that's pushing it a little far. These Italian meringues you can leave on the countertop for days, but not for, 5 days. Okay. Normally I would scrape and scrape and scrape, but it takes me a minute. I want to get this. I want to make sure to get the moisture though. There we go. So I'm going to put this in here and I'm going to bring it to a nice glossy peak. And in fact, you know what? I think, no, I'm going to go ahead and get it started. No, I'm not, because I want to know. I'm going to add some of the powder. And I would say typically I was guesstimating 1%. So can you add this pulverized freeze-dried fruit to a meringue when it's still liquid egg and have it dissolve nicely? That's something I want to play with, a question I have. But what I do like about freeze-dried fruit, first of all, I love them for scones, but second of all, they really have an intense flavor, which I love. So a 5-minute pull on the 3 pâte à choux, high ratio cake, or creme brulee. All right, it's started. So if you recall, it's a little grainy and it's kind of a weird gray color. So I'm not loving the color, but I want to taste it and see if there's any flavor, because I can just add more of the powder to intensify the color and the flavor. I mean, I don't love the grit. I don't like the grittiness and the flavor. I think if you didn't know it was blueberry, you wouldn't know. You would not know. So I added a little more. I added the whole bag. Here's the other thing I will tell you. These powders are exorbitantly expensive, and I don't know that they're actually practical for a home business or something like that. So here's this is the most glorious Swiss buttercream. We're getting some preliminary results. Keep voting. All of these will go on to the next week's options, and we will get to all the recipes when we get to them. Yeah, I just think Swiss buttercream's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Smooth, it's like mousse. And this will firm up in the fridge. So it's definitely blueberrier. It's grainy, which I don't like. So I think it could possibly be cooked into the meringue. It's kind of gray, it's not blue. But again, it's so expensive, like I don't know if I want to test that out much, but fun to try. All right, let's see. Maybe I'll whip it and see if it gets a little less grainy. And then here's the meringue that had the raspberry puree. And this is too runny. It wouldn't normally be this way, but I do like the color. And then if you wanted, you could mix in the two together. I would actually do the softer one into the firmer one, but let me just see. So that's the heavy. I don't think it's going to go together. Let's see. So you can mix meringues with buttercreams. I mean, really the possibilities are endless. And that will firm it up. So Italian meringues are the most versatile thing in the world. Oh, that's good. More raspberry butter. All right, so this is, see how grainy that is? I don't like the texture. I don't like the blueberry chunks at all. And they're kind of getting stuck in my teeth. So I would say, even if you cook them out, they might not be good because it's not a good texture. I do think their beauty is in when they're whole. I like to make scones using them because they hold their shape and the moisture does not negatively affect the structure of the scone. Woo! You know how I say every time? This is like, whoo! I don't normally, being in the kitchen's not about being glamorous. It's about being practical. And even to have makeup on and everything is sometimes problematic because you get busy. Okay. Let's answer some questions. And there are a million variations. Rose Levy has so many that chestnut and maple syrup, praline, crunch, espresso powder. There's a million things you can do. I like all of these buttercreams for piping. I mean, here's how it goes. If I'm serving children, they get American buttercream. Period. End of story. I use the decorators. If it's if they consider themselves to be picky eaters, I'm going to ask a client or a friend if I'm making buttercream or a cake for them. What don't you like about a cake, or what do you like, or what flavor profiles, or do you consider yourself a picky eater? And then I'm not going to offer them a European buttercream. It's not that it's not good. It's not that the texture is not wonderful and palatable. It's expectation and familiarity. I mean, who can resist something this shiny and glorious chocolate Swiss meringue buttercream? Gorge. This is the American buttercream. It's just a little more rustic, sweeter, a little grittier, and it's got some of the meringue in it. But here, let me stir. But look, it's soft and lovely, and there's nothing wrong with this. Now, if you have sophisticated people who are like, ew, I don't, whatever, you can layer in expensive fresh berries with an American buttercream just on the outside. Or you could do one layer of this and then cover it with the European buttercream. Because these European buttercreams are just the silkiest, smoothest. But some people, when they eat it, they say that it just tastes like butter to them and you can't change it. Oh my gosh, 51.43% high ratio cake to 48.57 pat a choux. I think we'll vote one more time. I'm gonna do 5 minutes, go. I know you guys feel as strongly about the choux as you do about the cake. I don't have a preference, I don't care. So here's how it's going to work. I am going to do supplemental auxiliary recipes. So the best thing to do is to make sure that you're watching any of the videos that I post for the week, because they will be on subject. Even if they're not right on the nose, they will be on subject and they will be complementary to whatever we're working on. So I'm here Eastern Standard Time on Wednesdays, 6 p.m. Whatever the recipe is that you choose on Sunday afternoons, I feature for the entire next week. I drop the recipe Sunday night or Monday morning. On Wednesday, I come here at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and I lecture about the recipe. What is the ideal? What are the ingredients? How does it work? What family does it live in? More about the history of and sort of what the expectation is for that recipe. And then I give a demonstration and I literally show you how to make it. And the link tree in my profile page has recipes for the PoP Baking Club, and I'll upload the recipes no later than Monday morning. You can print that, have it for the demo lecture on Wednesdays, and even if you don't make the live, you can catch up on YouTube where I take these live videos and I edit them to clean them up a little bit, and I post them there, part 1, part 2. Part 1 is Wednesday, lecture demo, and then I come back on Sundays and we do what we're doing now. We do experiments. I kind of add and layer in information. So you can make the recipe or not. You're never behind. You can take notes, and I am teaching you in a strange format exactly how I would manage my lectures and demos in real life as a pastry arts teacher. I would have you all look at the recipe in advance. I would have you think about the ingredients. I would have you think about what you know and can relate to. When you think of buttercream, you can think of all the weddings you've been to, all of your experiences from childhood, maybe times that you've made it. And then as you watch me work and talk, you can begin to fill in the bits and pieces and close the knowledge gap you have between maybe you're an advanced baker and maybe you've never baked at all, but you consume cakes with buttercream. Maybe you're getting married and you're not a baker and you're going to go test out cakes. Well, you'll have a little more information and be more informed when you make your decision. We have less than a minute to go, and we're going to stand behind whatever you guys pick. So do you see what I mean? You don't have to be a baker to enjoy this kind of information, because we all eat this stuff. And if you don't know what an Italian buttercream is from a Swiss, I think it kind of helps, because when you go to a restaurant and the menu takes the time, and the people developing their menus really want you to know what they're using and really highlight their efforts, I think that being informed is really, really interesting and exciting. So I'll be here on Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and Sundays at noon. I usually go between 2 and 2.5 hours. And catch up on YouTube. And we have 1 second left. Let's see. Oh, here we go. The high ratio cake at 58% beat the pâte à choux at 42%. All right, we're doing high ratio cake. I mean, that sounds great to me. I think that all of these buttercreams are going to come into play. And what I'll do between now and Wednesday, when I give my lecture demo on the high ratio cake, is put a lot of this stuff together and let you see it between a cake, refrigerated, and I will incorporate showing you how to cover it, wrap it, cool it, store it, freeze it, all the stuff that applies to understanding a cake. I call it a high ratio cake. If you want to make it easy, we can just call it a birthday cake. Lizzie says, yay, it's her birthday next week. Woo! Well, and look, I made this. So I don't know if you guys follow my cakes, but I like doing the petals where I decorate it with all the petals. I made green petals, and I'm going to cover this with rose petals made out of sugar. That's the back. This is Harriet's vanilla cake with Harriet's vanilla buttercream. And it's an American buttercream with all butter, no shortening. And it's on my link tree. And this is a shorter cake than I normally do, but I'm gonna make this into a St. Patrick's Day cake. So you'll see this on my TikTok. It's so heavy. If you've ever delivered a cake, you know how heavy cakes are. Woo! Now I'm thirsty. Is Eli still here? Because he's been baking like crazy and had some questions. Thank you, Dave. He's the best moderator and husband. Thank you, Dave. Here's what you'll know about the high ratio cake. It's from Toba Garrett's book. It is on my link tree already, and I'm going to do one that fits in the 4.5 quart mixer. It's going to be a yellow cake. I'm either going to do 6-inch rounds or 8-inch rounds, and I'm going to give you an idea of how I think about handling batters, approaching a cake project, and not stressing out about, you know, what pan does this fit into and whatever. A vanilla or white cake is different than a yellow or chocolate because you cannot use yolks. And when you remove the yolks from the cake, you're talking a different style. So Harriet's is a vanilla cake, and it's pretty white naturally, but not like white like you're thinking about. If you go white, I mean, maybe we do the white with the sponge. Yeah, I love my deli cups. I use them for everything. I mean, oh yeah, I was drinking out of it. Yeah, that's pretty common. You know, in the kitchen, you have to have it covered. So a lot of people put the cover on and poke a hole and have their straw through. But I'm dying of thirst. So we'll do the cake, and I will show you how to do the cake. The end result of the St. Patty's Day cake will be on tomorrow. I post one video a day, and tomorrow's will be that cake. Yeah, it'll be cute. I'll show you what I have. Because most people, I mean, I don't do a lot of cake decorating, but I used to be hardcore sugar crafter, and I was pretty good. So I make all these petals, they're rose petal shaped, and I put them in the cake. And the trick to a rose petal is that you overlap. If you dissect a rose, or you're building one or piping one, they cross like that. So as you add them, you know, they don't go like this. They go over, and you just keep adding them. And roses tend to be darker in the middle than on the outside. So the cake will be a little dark. The rose will be darker in the middle, and it'll get lighter, because roses as they open get lighter as they open. So I have to take all of these guys off this tray, give them a little dusting of some food color, special decorator food color. But you see how this one is lighter than that one? It'll be darker in the center, get lighter, and it'll be really pretty, and it'll be fun. And I just like to do those for any kind of holiday, because you can do whatever color you want, and making the rose petals is pretty quick and fun. And I enjoy any gum paste work. But I did gum paste work for years. It's very tedious, and it's hard to get paid unless you're in a really high-end market. So we'll do the cake, and I will layer in how to do a simple border and some finishing so that you can make it look nice, and a crumb coat. So I'll take all of those concepts and put them together so that you're not just learning how to make one cake. You're learning how to actually make the cake, get it filled and covered in a basic way that anybody can do. And then you can serve the cake. So I think I got all the questions from last week, and we've got a plan for next week. So I am going to take all of my buttercreams. Tuesday night, I'm going to pull mine out to room temp, and I'm going to use it on Wednesday. I would get the recipe off the link tree, print it out, read it, get familiar with it, get familiar with the method, diagram it out, and then come on Wednesday with a learning mindset where you're just open, you have a pen that you can take some notes, listen and think, and maybe ask some questions. And then after you watch me do it, you could do it between Wednesday and Sunday, which will give you different kinds of questions for Sunday, or you could just wait till Sunday's over and then make it the following week. And if you have questions, you can always throw them into the comments so that I can add them to my demos and lectures. So that's about it. I mean, anything that I'm doing here is foundational and basic. But as you begin to see that a lot of the concepts overlap, you will be able to approach any recipe, because I don't make a lot of recipes. I use a lot of other people's. I love using others and seeing how they work and learning new things, but I'm always connecting the dots. That's where the learning is when you're taking these different concepts and connecting them. Because if you get into a rigid mindset where you think you know the answer, or this is the only way to do it, or I always do it this way, or I don't, you know, you have to have the experience tie together with new things, and kind of look at your ingredients and how do they all sort of act the same and different, and I don't know. All right, well, I appreciate all of you coming. It is a whirlwind every time. I think doing one recipe is going to be really great. I will be here Wednesday at 6 p.m. I'll be making a high ratio cake. We'll call it a birthday cake, and I will be filling and frosting it, showing you some basic ways to finish a cake. I want all of you who've never even decorated a cake to realize that it's not that hard to fill and frost a cake with some basic instructions, and you can make a cake that looks really good, and people are gonna love it. You are welcome. As always, thank you. I mean, honestly, what would I be doing without all of you? I appreciate your enthusiasm. I just ask that you watch all the videos and like them, and keep the TikTok algorithm moving forward so that when we do lives and all of the things that we're doing will all pay off. I love sharing what I know, and I love that you guys are encouraging me to learn new stuff all the time. I think we make a good team. Thank you. I want everyone to have a wonderful rest of their weekend and a good start to the week. I'll see you midweek, Wednesday night at 6 o'clock. Happy baking. Thank you. Thank you so much. Alrighty, take care. Bye.